Leo Carter never imagined that helping one lost traveler would change everything. This hard-working single father from small-town Montana spends his days mopping floors at the local airport and his evenings tutoring French to make ends meet. His daughter Emma needs expensive medical treatments, and his own dreams of diplomatic work feel like distant memories buried under bills and exhaustion. Then fate walks through the airport doors in the form of Élodie Blanchet, a brilliant French billionaire fleeing her privileged life and a marriage she never wanted. When no one else can understand her desperate pleas for help, Leo steps forward with gentle words in perfect French. What begins as simple translation becomes something deeper. Two souls connecting across language, culture, and circumstance in ways neither expected. But will Leo risk everything he's built for a chance at the extraordinary life Élodie offers him in Paris? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced the Montana dawn at 4:30 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 3 years. Leo Carter's hand found the snooze button with practiced precision, his body already moving through the familiar choreography of another day that would demand everything he had to give. In the dim light filtering through threadbare curtains, Leo's small apartment told the story of a man caught between dreams and necessity. French textbooks lined makeshift shelves constructed from cinder blocks and planks, their spines worn smooth from countless hours of study. Conjugation charts hung beside Emma's colorful drawings on the refrigerator, creating an unlikely gallery where academic ambition met a father's love. Emma's medical bracelet caught the morning light from where it lay on the kitchen counter, a thin band of silver that carried the weight of Leo's world. The inscription read simply, "Emma Carter, age 12, chronic autoimmune condition, emergency contact, Leo Carter." Those clinical words couldn't capture the sleepless nights, the careful monitoring, the delicate balance of medications that kept his daughter's condition stable, or the mounting medical bills that threatened to topple their carefully constructed life. Leo padded quietly to Emma's room, where she slept peacefully under a quilt his mother had made years ago. At 12, Emma possessed a wisdom that often left Leo both proud and heartbroken. She understood, perhaps better than any child should, that their life required careful navigation around financial realities and medical limitations. Her latest drawing, a golden bird soaring above snow-capped mountains, was taped to her bedside lamp, casting dancing shadows that seemed to whisper of dreams beyond their small world. "Morning, sweetheart," Leo whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. "Time to get ready for Mrs. Henderson's." Emma stirred, her eyes opening with the clarity of someone accustomed to early mornings. "Did you sleep at all, Dad?" she asked, noting the circles under his eyes that seemed to deepen each day. "Enough," Leo replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. "Mrs. Henderson's making pancakes for breakfast, real ones, not the frozen kind." Their neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had become their salvation over the past year, a retired teacher with grown children scattered across the country. She'd taken Emma under her wing with the fierce protectiveness of a grandmother. Her small house next door had become Emma's second home, filled with the warmth and stability that Leo's work schedule couldn't always provide. The drive to the Glacier Peak Regional Airport took 20 minutes through winding mountain roads that showcased Montana's austere beauty. Leo had grown up here, had known every turn and rise since childhood, yet lately the familiar landscape felt different, smaller somehow, as if the mountains themselves were pressing in on his diminishing possibilities. Jake Morrison, the airport supervisor, was already at his desk when Leo arrived, nursing his first cup of coffee and reviewing the day's flight schedules. At 62, Jake had seen enough life to recognize both struggle and character, and he'd watched Leo navigate the past 3 years with quiet admiration. "Morning, Leo," Jake called out, not looking up from his paperwork. "Got that French businessman coming in on the 2 p.m. from Denver. Might need you to help with ground transport arrangements if his English is rough. Leo nodded, hanging his jacket on the hook by the maintenance closet. This was their unspoken arrangement. Leo's official title was janitor, but his linguistic skills had made him invaluable for the international travelers who occasionally found themselves in their small corner of Montana. The extra duties never came with extra pay, but Jake ensured Leo got the overtime hours that kept Emma's medical bills manageable. The morning passed in its predictable rhythm. Floors mopped, bathrooms cleaned, windows wiped clear of mountain dust. Leo found a meditative quality in the work, his mind often drifting to French phrases and grammatical structures, while his hands maintained the pristine condition that made Glacier Peak Airport a welcoming gateway to Big Sky country. During his lunch break, Leo sat in his car and called Dr. Martinez's office to confirm Emma's appointment for the following week. The receptionist's voice carried the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered financial realities alongside medical updates. Mr. Carter, Dr. Martinez wanted me to discuss the new treatment protocol with you. It's showing remarkable results for patients with Emma's condition, but I need to be transparent about the costs involved. Leo's grip tightened on the phone. How much are we talking about? The initial series would be approximately $12,000 over 6 months. Insurance would cover about 30%, maybe 40% if we're lucky with the appeals process. $8,000. Leo calculated quickly. His take-home pay was barely enough to cover their current expenses. Even with the tutoring income, accumulating that kind of money would require miracles or sacrifices he wasn't sure he could make. I understand, Leo managed. Let me figure some things out. Of course, Dr. Martinez wants you to know that Emma's current treatment is working well for now. This new protocol would be more preventative, potentially reducing future complications. We're not in crisis mode, Mr. Carter. We're planning for the best possible future. After ending the call, Leo sat in his car for several minutes, watching planes take off and land through the chain-link fence that bordered the employee parking lot. Each aircraft represented journeys to places he'd only studied in books. Paris, where he'd dreamed of working at the embassy. Geneva, where international organizations needed skilled translators. Brussels, where he'd imagined facilitating diplomatic conversations that mattered. Instead, he was here, cleaning floors and trying to figure out how to afford his daughter's medical care. The irony wasn't lost on him that he spoke French more fluently than many native speakers, yet his most complex conversations happened with Emma about homework and with Mrs. Henderson about pickup times. The afternoon brought the French businessman Jake had mentioned, a textile manufacturer from Lyon who spoke adequate English but appreciated Leo's assistance with local customs and directions. As Leo helped arrange the man's transportation to a nearby ski resort, he felt the familiar, bitter-sweet satisfaction of using his language skills in a meaningful way, however briefly. Merci beaucoup, the businessman said, shaking Leo's hand. Vous parlez français comme un vrai Parisien. You speak French like a real Parisian. The compliment lodged in Leo's chest, a small reminder of roads not taken and possibilities that felt increasingly distant. That evening, Leo's tutoring session with the Anderson twins ran longer than usual. Sarah and Michael, high school juniors preparing for their AP French exam, were bright students who reminded Leo why he'd fallen in love with teaching language in the first place. Their enthusiasm for conjugating irregular verbs and mastering the subjunctive mood rekindled something in Leo that his daily routine had nearly extinguished. Mr. Carter, Sarah said as they packed up their materials, have you ever been to France? The question hit Leo unexpectedly. No, he admitted, not yet. But you speak it so well. My mum says you could probably work as a translator at the United Nations or something. Languages are bridges, Leo replied, a phrase he'd used countless times in his teaching. Even if we never cross them ourselves, understanding them helps us connect with others. Michael looked thoughtful. That's kind of sad, though. It's like building a bridge to somewhere you'll never go. After the twins left, Leo sat at his kitchen table grading their homework assignments and planning the next week's lessons. Emma worked on her own homework nearby, occasionally asking questions about her history project on immigration to America. The comfortable quiet of their evening routine felt both precious and precarious. A life built from small moments that could be disrupted by medical bills, economic uncertainty, or simply the relentless passage of time. "Dad," Emma said, looking up from her textbook, "Mrs. Patterson at school said there's a scholarship program for kids with medical conditions. Maybe I could apply for college money?" Leo smiled at his daughter's forward-thinking optimism. "You're only 12, Em. College is still a ways off. But I want to study languages like you. Maybe we could travel together someday. Use your French skills in real French places." "Maybe we could," Leo agreed, though the words felt like promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Leo stood at his kitchen window looking out at the vast Montana sky. The stars here shone with an intensity impossible in larger cities, each one a distant sun, illuminating worlds he'd never see. He thought about Sarah Anderson's question, about bridges built to places he'd never cross, about the $8,000 that stood between Emma and the best possible medical care. Tomorrow would bring another 4:30 a.m. alarm, another day of mopping floors and dreams deferred. But tonight, Leo allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to use his languages for something larger than occasional airport assistance and teenage tutoring sessions. Somewhere out there, in cities where French was more than an academic exercise, people were conducting business, solving problems, and building connections across cultures. The kitchen clock chimed midnight, officially ending another day in the life of Leo Carter. Janitor, tutor, father, dreamer. Outside, a plane passed overhead, its lights blinking steadily as it carried passengers toward destinations that existed for Leo only in conjugation exercises and travel brochures. He turned off the kitchen light and headed toward his bedroom, not knowing that in less than 12 hours everything would change. Not knowing that fate was preparing to walk through the airport doors, speaking perfect French and carrying an invitation to a life he'd never dared to dream possible. The afternoon sky hung heavy with the promise of rain when she walked through the sliding glass doors of Glacier Peak Regional Airport. Leo noticed her immediately, not because of her obvious elegance, though she carried herself with a grace that seemed foreign to their small Montana terminal, but because of the way she moved through the space like someone utterly, completely lost. She wore designer jeans and a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Leo made in a month. But her carefully composed exterior couldn't hide the exhaustion in her dark eyes or the slight tremor in her hands as she approached the information desk. Her long auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried only a small leather handbag. No luggage, no boarding pass, no clear destination. "Excusez-moi," she said to Janet at the information desk, her voice carrying the melodic cadence of native French. "Je cherche, she paused, switching to heavily accented English. "I am looking for, how do you say, location for automobile rental." Janet, 63 and proud of her straightforward Montana communication style, looked genuinely pained by her inability to help. "Honey, I'm sorry, but I don't speak any French. Car rental, you said. We've got Hertz counter over there, but Tom's already gone home for the day." The woman's face fell slightly, and she glanced around the terminal with the particular kind of desperation that comes from being stranded in a foreign place, where communication feels impossible. Leo watched this exchange from across the terminal, where he was replacing burned-out fluorescent bulbs in the departure lounge. "Peut-être, maybe someone else?" the woman asked, her English carefully measured but clearly requiring effort. "Well," Janet said, looking around the nearly empty terminal, "there's Jake, but he doesn't speak foreign languages either." "Oh, Leo!" Janet called across the space. "Leo Carter! Come here a minute!" Leo set down his ladder, acutely aware of his janitors. uniform and the contrast he must present to this obviously sophisticated woman. As he approached, he caught fragments of her quiet conversation with herself in rapid French. Qu'est-ce que je fais ici? C'est ridicule. Je ne peux même pas louer une voiture. What am I doing here? This is ridiculous. I can't even rent a car. Leo speaks French, Janet announced proudly, as if she'd personally arranged this linguistic miracle. Leo, this lady needs help with car rental, I think. The woman turned toward Leo, and for a moment their eyes met with the particular intensity that happens when someone drowning suddenly sees a life preserver. Leo found himself looking into intelligent brown eyes that held equal measures of relief and wariness. Bonjour, Leo said gently, his voice taking on the careful pronunciation he'd perfected through years of study. Je m'appelle Leo. Comment puis-je vous aider? Hello, my name is Leo. How can I help you? The transformation in her expression was immediate and profound. Her shoulders relaxed, and something that might have been the beginning of tears gathered in her eyes before she blinked them away. Oh, mon Dieu, she breathed. Vous parlez français, je me sens tellement perdu. You speak French. I feel so lost. Je comprends, Leo replied. Vous cherchez une location de voiture? I understand. You're looking for a car rental? Oui, mais... She gestured helplessly around the terminal. Je ne sais pas où je vais. Je me suis enfui de quelque chose. Et maintenant je ne sais plus quoi faire. Yes, but I don't know where I'm going. I ran away from something, and now I don't know what to do. Leo glanced at Janet, who was watching this exchange with fascination despite understanding nothing. Would you like to sit down? He asked in English, then repeated in French. Voulez-vous vous asseoir quelque part? Il y a un café ici, on peut parler. She nodded gratefully, and Leo led her to Murphy's Cafe, the small restaurant that served the airport's limited food service. Murphy himself had gone home hours ago, but the coffee was still hot, and the booths offered privacy from the handful of other people in the terminal. Je m'appelle Élodie, she said once they were seated, wrapping her hands around a cup of coffee as if seeking warmth. Élodie Blanchet. Enchanté, Élodie. What brings you to Montana? Leo asked, then realized he'd switched to English and repeated the question in French. Élodie managed a rueful smile. That's a complicated question. I was supposed to be in Denver for business meetings, but She paused, reaching into her handbag and pulling out a photograph, a formal engagement photo showing her in an elegant gown standing next to a man in an expensive suit. The photo was torn in half, leaving only her image intact. I was supposed to announce my engagement today, she continued in French, her voice barely above a whisper. A marriage my family arranged. Good for business, they said. He's successful, comes from the right background, but standing there this morning, looking at all those reporters and photographers, I just couldn't. Leo studied her face, recognizing something familiar in her expression, the look of someone trapped between obligation and desire, between what others expected and what felt authentic. So you left? He asked gently. I told my driver to take me to the airport. I said Denver, but when we got there, I saw the departure board and all those cities, and Montana sounded quiet, remote, somewhere I could think. She laughed, but it held no humor. I didn't think about practical things like speaking English or knowing where to go once I arrived. Leo found himself genuinely curious about this elegant stranger who'd fled her engagement to end up in their small airport. And what did you discover? About what you want, I mean. Élodie considered this question seriously, stirring sugar into her coffee with deliberate precision. I discovered that I've spent so much time being who other people needed me to be that I'm not sure who I actually am. My family owns hotels across Europe. Beautiful places where other people go to feel special for a few days, but I realized I've never felt special anywhere, even in my own life. That sounds lonely, Leo said, and was surprised by his own honesty. It is, she agreed. What about you, Leo? Do you work here? Leo hesitated, suddenly self-conscious about his janitor's uniform and the vast distance between his reality and hers. I do maintenance work here, and I tutor French in the evenings." "Your French is remarkable," Élodie said. "Did you study in France?" "No," Leo admitted. "I learned from books mostly. I had plans once to work in international relations, maybe at an embassy. But life—" He gestured vaguely, thinking of Emma's medical needs and the morning's conversation. "With Dr. Martinez, life happened," Élodie finished softly. "I understand that feeling." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people from completely different worlds, finding unexpected common ground in the universal experience of dreams deferred. "You mentioned tutoring," Élodie said. "Do you enjoy teaching?" Leo's face. He brightened slightly. "I do. There's something magical about watching someone discover they can communicate across cultures, that they can understand and be understood by people they've never met. Languages are bridges." "That's beautiful," Élodie said. "You talk about bridges, but here you are, building one for me right now. I haven't felt truly heard by anyone in months, maybe years." Outside the cafe windows, the promised rain had begun to fall, creating rivulets down the glass that caught and scattered the afternoon light. Leo found himself genuinely enjoying this conversation in a way he hadn't experienced since his college days, when ideas and possibilities had seemed limitless. "Can I ask you something?" Élodie said, leaning forward slightly. "What would you do if money weren't a consideration? If you could just choose?" The question hit Leo unexpectedly. "I'd want to use languages to help people understand each other better. Maybe work with international organizations, facilitate conversations that matter, help build those bridges on a larger scale." "That's exactly what I thought you'd say," Élodie murmured, more to herself than to him. When the coffee was finished and the rain had intensified, Leo walked Élodie back to the main terminal. Jake had arranged for the car rental counter to stay open late, and Tom Wilson, the Hertz representative, was back to help with the paperwork. "Where will you go?" Leo asked as Élodie signed the rental agreement. "I'm not sure yet," she replied. "Maybe I'll drive around for a while, see some of your beautiful mountains, figure things out." Leo wanted to say more, to extend this unexpected connection, but the practical realities of his life pressed in around him. Emma would be waiting at Mrs. Henderson's, and he had lesson plans to prepare for the Anderson twins. "It was wonderful meeting you, Élodie," he said formally, extending his hand. She took his hand in both of hers, holding it just a moment longer than a simple handshake required. "Thank you, Leo, not just for the translation, but for listening, for seeing me as more than just a lost tourist. Thank you for reminding me why I fell in love with languages in the first place," Leo replied. As Élodie walked toward the exit, with her rental car keys, she turned back once. "Leo, I hope you find your way to those bridges you want to build. The world needs people like you." Leo watched her disappear into the rain, carrying with her the torn engagement photo and the weight of decisions that would reshape her life. He had no way of knowing that 3 weeks later, she would return in a golden helicopter with an offer that would change everything he thought he knew about possibility. For now, he simply stood at the window, watching her tail lights disappear into the Montana evening, feeling as though something profound had just passed through his ordinary life and left everything subtly, irrevocably different. The next morning arrived with the same 4:30 a.m. alarm, but Leo found himself lying awake several minutes before it sounded, his mind replaying fragments of conversation from the day before. Élodie's voice echoed in his memory, the way she'd said merci with such genuine gratitude, the vulnerability in her eyes when she'd spoken about feeling lost in her own life. Emma noticed his distraction immediately over breakfast. At 12, she possessed an intuitive understanding of her father's moods that sometimes surprised him with its accuracy. "You seem different today, Dad," she observed, stirring honey into her oatmeal with deliberate precision. "A good different, like when you're really excited about teaching something new." Leo paused in the middle of packing her lunch, caught off guard by his daughter's perceptiveness. "Just had an interesting conversation at work yesterday. Helped someone with French translation. Was she pretty? Emma asked with the directness that only children can manage. Emma, Leo said, though he couldn't suppress a small smile. It wasn't like that. She was just someone who needed help. Uh-huh, Emma replied, with the knowing tone of someone who'd watched her father navigate 3 years of careful solitude. Mrs. Henderson says it would be okay if you liked someone. She says you're allowed to be happy too. The comment lingered in Leo's mind as he drove Emma to Mrs. Henderson's house. His neighbor greeted them at the door with her usual warm efficiency, but Leo caught her studying his expression with the sharp eyes of someone who'd raised 4 children and understood the subtle signs of emotional weather changes. You look like a man with something on his mind, Mrs. Henderson observed as Emma gathered her school supplies. Just work stuff, Leo replied, but even he could hear how unconvincing it sounded. At the airport, Leo found himself glancing toward the main entrance more frequently than usual, though he couldn't have explained what he was expecting to see. The routine tasks of cleaning and maintenance felt more mechanical than meditative, his attention divided between the physical work and the mental replay of yesterday's encounter. During his lunch break, Leo did something he'd never done before. He pulled out his phone and searched for Élodie Blanchet. The results were immediate and overwhelming. Articles in French business publications, society page photos from charity galas in Paris and Monaco, mentions in Forbes and Financial Times. The woman who'd sat across from him at Murphy's Cafe drinking coffee and talking about feeling invisible was apparently one of the most prominent young business leaders in Europe. The photographs showed her in elegant gowns at fundraising events, in sharp business suits at corporate conferences, always poised and confident. But Leo found himself looking for the vulnerability he'd glimpsed yesterday, the uncertainty that had made her seem so fundamentally human, despite her obvious sophistication. One article, dated just 2 days ago, carried a headline in French: Héritière Blanchet disparue avant l'annonce de fiançailles. Blanchet heiress disappears before engagement announcement. Leo read the piece carefully, his understanding of business French more limited than his conversational skills, but clear, enough to grasp the essentials. Élodie had indeed fled a carefully orchestrated engagement announcement, leaving her family's business partners and society reporters confused and concerned about her whereabouts. The article mentioned her role as Deputy Director of International Development for Blanchet Hospitality Group, her MBA from INSEAD, her work in sustainable tourism development. This was not someone who'd simply gotten lost at an airport. This was someone who'd deliberately stepped outside her entire world. Leo closed his phone, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The woman he'd shared coffee with was so far outside his social and economic sphere that their conversation now seemed almost surreal. Yet he couldn't shake the memory of how genuine their connection had felt, how naturally they'd talked about dreams and disappointments. That evening's tutoring session with the Anderson twins took on new energy. Leo found himself describing French, business culture and international protocol with a passion that surprised both himself and his students. "Mr. Carter," Michael Anderson said during a break, "you're like really into this stuff tonight. Did something happen?" "Just remembering why I love languages," Leo replied. "They're not just academic exercises. They're keys to understanding how other people see the world." "Have you ever met anyone famous who speaks French?" Sarah asked. Leo hesitated. "I met someone yesterday who reminded me that the most important conversations often happen between people who might never have crossed paths otherwise." After the twins left, Leo sat at his kitchen table with his father's worn French dictionary, a massive tome that had been his companion through years of self-study. The dictionary had belonged to his father during his brief college years before. Marriage and family responsibilities had redirected his own dreams. Leo had inherited both the book and, perhaps, the pattern of deferred ambitions. He found himself looking up words related to business and international relations, terms he'd seen in the articles about Élodie. Développement durable, Sustainable. Development. Partenariat stratégique. Strategic partnership. Responsabilité sociale. Social responsibility. These were the concepts that shaped her professional world, languages of power and influence that felt both foreign and fascinating. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, already in her pajamas and carrying the book she was reading for English. Class. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Do you ever wish we lived somewhere else, like in a big city or maybe another country? The question caught Leo off guard. Why do you ask? Emma settled into the chair across from him, her expression thoughtful. I was reading about this girl, in my book, who gets to travel all over the world because her family has money, and I was thinking about how you know all these languages, but you've never been to the places where people actually speak them. Leo closed the dictionary and gave Emma his full attention. Do you feel like you're missing out on things? Not missing out, exactly, Emma said carefully. More like wondering what it would be like if things were different, if you could. Use your French for something bigger than helping lost tourists. Even if we could travel, Em, your medical care is here. Dr. Martinez knows your case, and we have our insurance figured out. I know, Emma said quickly. I'm not complaining. I just sometimes wonder what would happen if someone offered you a chance to do something amazing with your languages. Would you take it? The conversation felt eerily prescient, as if Emma had somehow intuited the possibility that Leo himself hadn't dared to articulate. I don't know, he answered honestly. It would depend on a lot of factors, like whether I could come too. Leo smiled. Any amazing opportunity that didn't include you wouldn't be amazing at all. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Leo found himself standing at the kitchen window again, looking out at the vast Montana sky. He thought about Élodie, probably somewhere in the mountains right now, driving rental car through the darkness and wrestling with decisions that would reshape her entire life. He thought about the torn engagement photo, about her comment that she'd never felt special anywhere, even in her own life. He thought about bridges, the metaphor he'd used to describe languages, and the literal bridge that their conversation had built between two very different worlds. Tomorrow would bring another day of routine, another set of floors to clean, and lessons to teach. But something had shifted in Leo's understanding of possibility. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering not just about survival and stability, but about what might happen if he dared to want something more. The dictionary lay open on the table where he'd left it, and the last phrase he'd looked up seemed to glow in the lamplight. Prendre le risque, to take the risk. Some opportunities, Leo realized, required more than just translation. They required courage. The call from Dr. Martinez's office came on a Thursday morning while Leo was replacing broken ceiling tiles in the airport's baggage claim area. The receptionist's voice carried the practiced sympathy he'd come to recognize. The tone, medical, officers used when delivering news that would require difficult decisions. Mr. Carter, Dr. Martinez would like to schedule a consultation to discuss Emma's latest test results. Nothing urgent, she added quickly, but we'd like to move forward with that treatment protocol we discussed earlier. Leo's stomach tightened. How soon does she need to start? Ideally, within the next month. The insurance pre-authorization process is moving more slowly than we hoped. We're looking at approximately $7,800 out of pocket, possibly more depending on Emma's response to the initial treatments. $7,800. Leo stood in the middle of the baggage claim area, surrounded by ceiling tiles and maintenance equipment, calculating impossible mathematics. Even with overtime hours and every tutoring session he could manage, accumulating that amount would take months they might not have. I'll call you back about scheduling, Leo managed. After ending the call, Leo sat on one of the baggage claim benches, staring at his phone. Around him, the normal rhythm of airport life continued. Passengers collecting luggage, families reuniting, travelers beginning journeys to places he'd only imagined. For the first time in years, The familiar environment felt suffocating rather than comforting. That afternoon, Emma's school nurse called with concerns about her fatigue levels. Nothing alarming, but consistent with the pattern Dr. Martinez had warned them to monitor. Emma needed the new treatment, and she needed it soon. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Paris, Élodie Blanchet sat in her corner office on the 32nd floor of the Blanchet Hospitality Group headquarters, staring out at the Champs-Élysées without seeing the elegant bustle below. The past week had been a carefully orchestrated dance of damage control, with her family's public relations team crafting explanations for her sudden illness that had prevented the engagement announcement. But Élodie's thoughts kept returning to a small airport cafe in Montana and a janitor named Leo who'd spoken about bridges with more passion than most people brought to their life's work. She'd spent her adult life surrounded by ambitious, educated, powerful people, yet none of them had made her feel as genuinely seen as this stranger who cleaned floors for a living. Her assistant Margot appeared in the doorway with a stack of contracts requiring signature. "Your mother called again," Margot said carefully. "She'd like to know when you'll be ready to reschedule the engagement announcement." "Tell her I'm still considering my options," Élodie replied without looking away from the window. She also mentioned that Pierre has been very understanding about the postponement. His family is willing to wait until you're feeling better. Pierre Dubois, heir to a luxury goods empire, Harvard MBA, fluent in 5 languages, and absolutely perfect on paper. Their marriage would create a business dynasty that would dominate European hospitality and luxury markets for generations. It was the logical next step in a life that had been carefully planned since childhood. "Margot," Élodie said suddenly, "what do you know about private investigation services? Discreet ones?" "Investigation services." Margot's eyebrows rose slightly. "May I ask what kind of investigation?" "I need to find someone, an American. I only have a first name and the town where he works." Within 24 hours, Élodie had comprehensive information about Leo Carter, his employment history, his daughter's medical situation, his educational background, even his late wife's obituary from 4 years earlier. The report painted a picture of a man who'd sacrificed his own ambitions to care for his family, who'd quietly built a reputation as an exceptional language tutor despite having no formal teaching credentials. The financial information was particularly illuminating. Leo's combined income barely covered basic living expenses, and Emma's medical costs created a constant strain that would soon reach a breaking point. The new treatment Dr. Martinez had recommended would cost exactly the amount Leo couldn't possibly accumulate in time. Élodie stared at the investigator's report for a long time, thinking about their conversation at Murphy's Cafe. Leo had asked her what she would do if money weren't a consideration, and she'd been struck by the freedom implicit in the question. Now she understood that for Leo, money wasn't just a consideration. It was the primary factor determining every choice he could make. Back in Montana, Leo was discovering just how few options were available to him. He'd inquired about a second job, but the scheduling conflicts with his current work and Emma's care needs made additional employment nearly impossible. He'd researched medical loans, but the interest rates would create an unsustainable debt burden. He'd even considered selling his father's book collection, the French literature and reference materials that represented years of careful acquisition, but their actual market value was disappointingly modest. Emma seemed to sense the increased tension, though Leo tried to shield her from the financial details. She began creating elaborate drawings during her quiet time. Fantasy landscapes filled with golden birds soaring above snow-capped mountains, children riding in hot air balloons, families exploring castles that looked suspiciously like the French. Chateau from Leo's textbooks. "Dad," she said one evening, holding up her latest creation, "do you think birds ever get tired of flying to the same places?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Like, do you think they ever want to see what's on the other side of the mountain, even if it's scary or different? Leo studied the drawing. A golden bird with outstretched wings, caught mid-flight between familiar territory and unknown possibilities. I think, he said carefully, that sometimes the scariest thing is staying in the same place when you know there might be something better waiting for you. Even if flying somewhere new means leaving everything safe behind. The question felt loaded with meaning beyond Emma's 12 years. Maybe especially then, Leo replied. That night, Mrs. Henderson stopped by with a casserole and the kind of practical concern that characterized their friendship. Leo, she said without preamble, I know something's weighing on you. Is it Emma's medical stuff? Leo found himself telling her about the treatment costs, about the impossible timeline, about the calculations that never quite worked, no matter how he approached them. Have you considered asking for help? Mrs. Henderson asked. The community here cares about you and Emma. People would want to contribute. I can't ask people to pay for my problems, Leo said. Everyone here has their own struggles. Pride's a luxury you might not be able to afford right now, Mrs. Henderson replied gently. Sometimes accepting help is harder than giving it, but Emma's health is more important than your comfort with independence. After Mrs. Henderson left, Leo sat at his kitchen table with a blank piece of paper, trying to draft a letter asking for community assistance. Each attempt felt inadequate, too desperate, too proud, too detailed, too vague. How do you ask people to fund your child's medical care without sounding like you're exploiting their sympathy? Outside, the Montana wind rattled the windows of their small apartment, and Leo found himself thinking about Élodie's question. What would he do if money weren't a consideration? The answer seemed both simpler and more complex now than it had a week ago. He would ensure Emma received the best possible medical care. He would use his language skills to build meaningful bridges between cultures. He would stop feeling trapped by circumstances and start believing in possibilities. But money was a consideration, perhaps the only consideration that mattered. Unless something miraculous happened, Leo would soon face choices no parent should have to make, and dreams would once again take a back seat to survival. He had no way of knowing that in a corner office in Paris, someone was already working on the miracle he desperately needed. Élodie's private jet touched down at Billings Logan International Airport on a grey Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after her first encounter with Leo Carter. She told her assistant this was a scouting trip for potential hospitality investments in the American West, a plausible cover story that would explain her presence in Montana without revealing her true purpose. The investigators' report had provided Leo's address, work schedule, and daily routines with uncomfortable precision. Élodie felt like a stalker, yet she couldn't shake the conviction that she needed to see him again, to understand whether their connection had been real or simply the product of her emotional vulnerability and his unexpected kindness. She rented a modest SUV and drove the winding mountain roads toward Glacier Peak, stopping frequently to absorb the austere beauty of the landscape. The vastness here felt different from the manicured countryside of France, raw, uncompromising, honest in a way that matched what she remembered of Leo's character. Meanwhile, Leo was discovering that desperation could be a powerful motivator. He'd taken on additional cleaning shifts at the airport, arriving even earlier and staying later to maximize his overtime hours. The extra work left him exhausted, but every additional dollar brought Emma's treatment marginally closer to possibility. His French tutoring had also expanded through word of mouth. The Anderson twins had recommended him to classmates, and Leo now spent most evenings helping high school students navigate irregular verbs and cultural nuances. The additional income was modest, but significant in the context of their tight budget. Emma noticed her father's increased exhaustion with the perceptive concern that had become her trademark. She began taking on more household responsibilities without being asked, making her own breakfast, organizing her school supplies, even attempting to help with laundry in ways that were more endearing than effective. "Dad," she said one evening, As Leo reviewed lesson plans at the kitchen table, "You don't have to work so hard for me. I can wait for the new treatment if we need more time." Leo looked up from his papers, struck by his daughter's maturity and generosity. You're 12 years old. You shouldn't have to worry about things like treatment costs or waiting for medical care." "But you're wearing yourself out," she replied. "Mrs. Henderson says you've lost weight, and I can see you're tired all the time." "I'm fine," Leo insisted, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. The combination of physical labor and mental effort required by his expanded teaching schedule was taking a toll he couldn't quite hide. "Maybe we could ask people for help," Emma suggested quietly. "Like Mrs. Henderson said, I wouldn't mind if people knew about my medical stuff." Leo reached across the table and took her hand. "You are the bravest person I know, but this is my responsibility. I'll figure it out." What Leo didn't know was that figuring it out was no longer entirely his burden to bear. Élodie had been in Montana for 3 days, staying at a luxury lodge, an hour from Glacier Peak, and carefully observing Leo's routines. She'd watched him arrive at the airport before dawn, had seen him work through lunch breaks, had followed him to his evening tutoring sessions with the dedication of someone conducting crucial research. The picture that emerged was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Leo moved through his demanding schedule with quiet dignity, never complaining, never cutting corners, never allowing his exhaustion to affect the quality of his work or his interactions with students. Élodie observed him helping confused travelers, patiently explaining French pronunciation to teenagers, and maintaining the airport's cleanliness with meticulous care. On Thursday evening, Élodie finally worked up the courage to approach one of Leo's students. She positioned herself at a coffee shop near the library where Leo held his tutoring sessions and struck up a conversation with Sarah Anderson during a study break. "Excuse me," Élodie said, affecting a slight accent. "I'm visiting from France, and I heard there's an excellent French tutor in this area. Someone recommended a Mr. Carter." Sarah's face lit up immediately. "Oh my gosh, yes, Mr. Carter is amazing. He's like better than our actual French teacher at school. He makes everything make sense, and he knows all this cool stuff about French culture." "Is he from France originally?" "No, he's from here, which makes it even more incredible, you know. He learned French from books and stuff, but he speaks it like he was born there. My mom says he could probably work at the United Nations or something if he wanted to." "Why doesn't he?" Élodie asked, genuinely curious about the local perspective on Leo's situation. Sarah's expression grew more serious. "He's got a daughter with medical problems, really expensive treatment stuff, so he works at the airport and tutors on the side to pay for everything. It's kind of sad because you can tell he'd love to do something bigger with his language skills, but he's stuck here taking care of his daughter." "That sounds very dedicated." "He's the best dad ever," Sarah said with conviction. "Emma's really lucky, even if they don't have much money. Mr. Carter would do anything for her." That evening, Élodie sat in her lodge room making calculations of her own. $7,800. The amount Leo needed for Emma's treatment represented approximately what Élodie spent on a typical weekend shopping trip to London. It was less than she'd paid for her last handbag, a fraction of what she spent monthly on flowers for her various residences. The disparity was staggering and humbling. Here was a man sacrificing his health and dreams for his daughter's medical care, while Élodie routinely spent equivalent amounts on trivial luxuries she rarely even noticed. But simply writing a check felt wrong, charitable in a way that would diminish Leo's dignity and fail to address the larger question of his underutilized talents. Élodie found herself thinking about their conversation at Murphy's Cafe, about Leo's passion for building bridges between cultures, about his natural gift for making people feel understood. She began sketching ideas in a leather notebook, business, concepts that could legitimately employ Leo's linguistic abilities while providing the financial stability he needed. cultural consulting for international businesses expanding into American markets, translation services for European companies seeking authentic American partnerships, educational programs that brought real-world language application to academic settings. The more she developed these ideas, the more excited Élodie became. This wasn't charity. This was recognizing untapped potential and creating mutual benefit. Leo possessed skills that were genuinely valuable in her world, abilities that could justify significant compensation without any element of condescension. Friday morning brought unexpected validation of Élodie's observations. She was having coffee at the airport cafe when a group of German tourists became frustrated with communication barriers. Leo appeared as if summoned, switching effortlessly between English and German to help them navigate transportation options and local attractions. Watching him work, Élodie saw the natural diplomat he could become, patient, intuitive, genuinely interested in helping people connect across cultural differences. His talent was being wasted in this small Montana airport, not because the work lacked dignity, but because his abilities deserved a larger stage. That afternoon, Élodie made her decision. She would return to Paris, develop a concrete proposal, and come back to Montana with an offer that could change Leo's life without compromising his integrity. She would give him the opportunity to build those bridges he'd spoken about, but on an international scale that could support his family and fulfill his potential. As she drove back toward Billings for her return flight, Élodie passed Leo walking to his car after his afternoon shift. For a moment, she considered stopping, revealing herself, explaining everything. But timing mattered in business as much as in romance, and this proposal needed to be perfect. Leo Carter deserved an offer that honored both his talents and his choices. Élodie was determined to provide exactly that, even if it meant waiting a little longer to see him again. Leo's breaking point came on a Friday afternoon, in his third week of extended hours. He'd been cleaning the men's restroom when a wave of dizziness forced him to lean against the wall, his vision blurring at the edges. The combination of early mornings, late nights, and inadequate nutrition was taking a toll his 35-year-old body could no longer absorb without complaint. Jake Morrison found him there 10 minutes later, sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. "Jesus, Leo," Jake said, kneeling beside him. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" Leo tried to stand and immediately regretted the decision. "I'm fine. Just need a minute." "Like hell you're fine. Come on." Jake helped Leo to his feet and guided him to the staff break room. "Sit down and don't argue with me." While Jake rummaged through the break room refrigerator, Leo stared at his reflection in the microwave door. The man looking back was hollow-eyed and gaunt, a shadow of the person who'd shared coffee with Élodie 3 weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was working himself to death, trying to ensure Emma's health. "Here," Jake said, placing a sandwich and a cup of coffee in front of Leo. "And before you say anything about charity, consider this an employee wellness initiative. Can't have my best maintenance guy collapsing on the job." Leo ate the sandwich slowly, feeling strength return with each bite. "Jake, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Shoot. If I wrote a resignation letter, would you hold on to it for me? Not submit it immediately, just keep it as an option." Jake's expression grew serious. "Leo, what's going on? Really going on?" For the first time in months, Leo found himself telling someone the complete truth about Emma's medical situation, the cost of the new treatment, and his growing realization that his current income, even with all the overtime and tutoring, wouldn't be sufficient. "I've been thinking about taking a second job," Leo admitted. "Maybe something in Billings with better pay. It would mean giving up the tutoring here, longer commutes, less time with Emma, but you're desperate," Jake finished quietly. "I'm desperate," Leo confirmed. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying Leo with the expression of someone weighing difficult decisions. "What if I told you there might be another option? Something that came across my desk this week that I haven't mentioned because it seemed too good to be true." Leo looked up sharply. What kind of option? International consulting firm based in Europe. They're looking for American cultural liaisons, people with language skills who can help European businesses understand American markets. The position would involve some travel, but the salary... Jake shook his head. Let's just say it would solve your immediate problems and then some. Jake, that sounds like exactly the kind of job I used to dream about, which means it's probably exactly the kind of job I'm not qualified for. Actually, Jake said, pulling a folder from his desk drawer. They specifically want people without traditional corporate backgrounds. They want authentic American perspectives, not MBA speak. Your language skills, your teaching experience, your understanding of small-town American culture, that's exactly what they're looking for. Leo stared at the folder, as if it might disappear if he looked away. How did this come to your attention? HR consultant from their firm called me directly. Said they were looking for candidates in Montana specifically. People with French language skills who understood both business and education. I immediately thought of you, but I figured you wouldn't be interested in leaving Emma. The travel. Requirements? Negotiable, according to the initial description. Some positions could be primarily remote with quarterly trips to Europe. Others might involve relocation assistance for families. Leo opened the folder and scanned the job description. The salary range was more than double his current income, with benefits that would cover Emma's medical expenses completely. The work itself, facilitating cultural understanding between European and American business partners, aligned perfectly with his interests and abilities. This has to be a scam, Leo said finally. People don't just call random airport supervisors, offering dream jobs to janitors. That's what I thought too, Jake admitted, but I did some research. The company's legitimate, the references check out, and frankly, Leo, you're not just a janitor. You're the most educated person on my staff. You speak 3 languages fluently, and you've been essentially running cultural orientation for our international travelers for years. That evening, Leo drove home with the job description folder. On his passenger seat, afraid to hope, but unable to dismiss the possibility entirely. Emma noticed his improved mood immediately. You look different, she observed over dinner. Less tired? Jake gave me some information about a potential job opportunity, Leo said carefully. It's probably nothing, but it's interesting. What kind of job? Working with companies that do business in different countries, using language skills to help people understand each other better. Emma's eyes widened. Like being a bridge? Like you always talk about? Something like that. Would we have to move? Leo hesitated. The job description mentioned possible relocation, but also remote work options. I don't know yet. Would that scare you? Emma considered this seriously. It would be scary, she said finally, but also kind of exciting, especially if it meant you could do work that makes you happy instead of just work that pays bills. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Leo sat at his kitchen table and began drafting a response to the job listing. He'd never written a cover letter for anything more ambitious than his airport maintenance position, and the process of articulating his qualifications felt both humbling and empowering. He wrote about his language studies, his teaching experience, his years of helping international travelers navigate American customs and expectations. He wrote about his belief that cultural understanding was essential for successful business relationships, and his conviction that authentic communication required more than just linguistic translation. As he wrote, Leo found himself remembering his conversation with Élodie, her comment about bridges, and her observation that he'd helped her feel genuinely heard. Perhaps his years of quiet service in a small Montana airport had prepared him for exactly this kind of opportunity. The completed letter was 3 pages long, longer than he'd intended, but impossible to condense without losing essential elements. As he printed the final version, Leo allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to use his abilities for work that mattered, to earn enough money that Emma's medical care wouldn't require constant financial anxiety, to finally build those bridges he'd been talking about for years. The application went into the mail the next morning, and Leo tried not to calculate how long it might take to receive a response. Some opportunities, he reminded himself, required patience as much as preparation. What he couldn't have known was that his letter would arrive in Paris within 48 hours, where Élodie Blanchet would read it with growing excitement and immediately begin planning her return to Montana, this time with a golden helicopter and a proposal that would change everything. The sound came first, a deep, rhythmic thumping that seemed to shake the windows of Leo's small apartment. Emma looked up from her homework, eyes wide with curiosity, while Leo paused in the middle of preparing dinner to listen more carefully. "Dad," Emma said, moving to the living room window, "there's a helicopter in our front yard." Leo assumed she was exaggerating until he joined her at the window and saw the gleaming golden aircraft settling onto the small patch of grass between their apartment building and the street. Neighbors were emerging from their homes, drawn by the spectacle of what appeared to be a luxury helicopter landing in their modest residential area. "That's impossible," Leo murmured, but the evidence was unmistakable. The helicopter bore elegant script lettering, Blanchet Enterprises, and, as the rotors slowed, a figure emerged from the passenger compartment. Even at a distance, even dressed in dark jeans and a simple cream sweater, Élodie Blanchet moved with the same graceful confidence Leo remembered from their encounter at the airport. She carried 2 coffee cups and walked toward their building as if golden helicopters routinely delivered French billionaires to small-town Montana neighborhoods. "Dad," Emma said slowly, "do you know that lady?" Leo's mouth felt dry. I think that's the woman I helped at the airport, the one who spoke French. The pretty one you said it wasn't like that about?" Before Leo could formulate a response, there was a gentle knock at their door. Leo opened it to find Élodie standing in his hallway, holding 2 cups from what he recognized as Murphy's Cafe, and wearing an expression that mixed nervousness with determination. "Bonjour, Leo," she said softly. "I brought coffee and a proposition." Behind Leo, Emma appeared with the wide-eyed fascination of a 12-year-old witnessing something that belonged in fairy tales rather than real life. "You must be Emma," Élodie said, switching to English and offering a warm smile. "I'm Élodie. Your father helped me when I was very lost a few weeks ago." Emma looked between her father and this elegant stranger, clearly trying to process the situation. "Are you the reason Dad has been different lately? Like, distracted, but in a good way?" Élodie's smile became more genuine. "I hope so. May I come in? I have something important to discuss with both of you." Leo stepped aside, acutely, aware of their modest apartment's contrast with the luxury Élodie obviously represented, but she settled onto their worn couch as if it were the most natural thing in the world, placing the coffee cups on Emma's homework-covered kitchen table. "Leo," Élodie began, "I need to be completely honest with you about who I am and why I'm here." Over the next 30 minutes, Élodie explained everything. Her identity as heir to a European hospitality empire, her research into Leo's background, her growing conviction that his talents were being wasted in his current situation, and her carefully developed business proposition. "I've spent the past 3 weeks creating a legitimate consulting position," she said, pulling papers from her handbag. "Cultural liaison for European companies expanding into American markets. The work would involve translation, cultural coaching, and relationship facilitation, exactly the kind of bridge building you talked about." Leo stared at the contract she placed before him. The salary figure seemed to have too many digits. "This can't be real," he said finally. "It's completely real," Élodie assured him. "The position exists because I created it, but the need is genuine. European businesses struggle constantly with American cultural nuances. They need someone who understands both worlds, someone who can facilitate authentic communication." Emma, who had been listening with the intense focus she brought to important conversations, raised her hand as if she were in school. Excuse me, but are you offering my dad a job because you like him or because he's good at languages? Élodie considered the question seriously. Both, she said finally. Your father has remarkable abilities that are currently underutilized. But yes, I also care about what happens to him, to both of you. The medical insurance, Leo said, scanning the contract. It covers everything. International coverage, including experimental treatments not available in standard plans. Emma would have access to the best pediatric specialists in Europe and America. Leo felt dizzy again, but this time from possibility rather than exhaustion. Why? He asked. Why would you do this for people you barely know? Élodie was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Because that afternoon at Murphy's Cafe was the first time in years that someone saw me as more than my family, name or my business connections. You treated me like a human being who happened to need help, not like a networking opportunity or a charity case. You reminded me why I fell in love with languages and cultures in the first place. But this seems like, Leo gestured at the in contract, like you're trying to rescue us. I'm not trying to rescue you, Élodie said firmly. I'm trying to offer you the opportunity to use your talents the way they deserve to be used. This position would exist whether or not I had personal feelings involved, because the business need is real. Emma, who had been studying Élodie with the shrewd assessment skills of someone accustomed to evaluating adults who made promises, spoke up suddenly. Can I ask you something kind of personal? Of course, Élodie replied. When you were lost at the airport, were you really lost? Or were you running away from something? Élodie's expression showed surprise at Emma's perceptiveness. I was running away from a life that didn't feel like mine. Your father helped me realize that sometimes the scariest thing isn't leaving what's familiar. It's staying somewhere that doesn't honor who you really are. And now you want Dad to leave what's familiar. I want to offer him the choice, Élodie said. The choice to stay here and continue building a good life, or the choice to come to Paris and build something extraordinary. Leo looked at his daughter, this wise 12-year-old who seemed to understand the implications better than he did. What do you think? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between her father and Élodie. I think, she said finally, that you've been taking care of me my whole life, and maybe it's time for someone to take care of you too. But also, I think this lady is right about your bridge thing. You're too good at languages to spend your whole life cleaning floors. The transition would be gradual, Élodie added. You could start with remote consultation work while Emma finishes her school year. Test the arrangement before making any permanent commitments. Leo stared at the contract, at the salary figure that would solve their immediate problems and create possibilities he'd never dared consider. There has to be a catch. The catch, Élodie said, is that you'd be working with me closely, and I can't promise that my feelings for you won't complicate the professional relationship. The honesty of this admission hung in the air between them. Emma looked fascinated by this adult conversation about emotions and complications. Are you saying you have feelings for my dad? Emma asked, with the directness that only children could manage. Élodie's cheeks flushed slightly. I'm saying that our conversation at the airport affected me more than any business meeting I've had in years. But I'm also saying that this job offer stands regardless of any personal considerations. Leo looked around their small apartment, at Emma's artwork on the refrigerator, at his father's French books lining the makeshift shelves, at the medical bracelet on the kitchen counter that represented years of careful financial navigation. Then he looked at Élodie, this extraordinary woman who'd somehow seen past his circumstances to recognize abilities he'd almost forgotten he possessed. I need time to think about this, he said finally. Of course, Élodie replied, but I should mention I can only stay until tomorrow evening. Business obligations require my return to Paris by Sunday. 24 hours, Leo said, the timeline creating immediate pressure. 24 hours, Élodie confirmed. But Leo, whatever you decide, I want you to know that meeting you changed my perspective on what's possible when people genuinely connect across cultures. This opportunity exists because you reminded me why I care about building bridges in the first place. As Élodie prepared to leave for her hotel, Emma surprised everyone by asking, "Can I hug you?" "I would like that very much," Élodie replied, and Emma embraced her with the uncomplicated affection of someone who recognized kindness when she encountered it. After the golden helicopter lifted off into the Montana evening, Leo and Emma sat at their kitchen table staring at the contract that could reshape their entire future. "Dad," Emma said quietly, "I think the fairy tale lady might be right about the bridge thing. You think I should take the job?" Emma smiled, the expression mixing wisdom and mischief in equal measure. "I think you should take the chance." Leo spent the night staring at the ceiling. The contract spread across his kitchen table like a map to an impossible destination. Every few hours, he'd get up to read through the terms again, searching for hidden catches or unrealistic expectations that would reveal the offer as too good to be true. But the language was straightforward, the benefits comprehensive, and the work description aligned perfectly with abilities he'd spent years developing in academic solitude. By dawn, Leo had made lists, practical considerations on one side, emotional factors on the other. Emma's medical care topped the practical column, followed by financial security, professional fulfillment, and the opportunity to use his language skills meaningfully. The emotional side proved more complex. His growing feelings for Élodie, Emma's adaptability, his fear of leaving familiar territory, and the possibility that this opportunity might disappear as suddenly as it had appeared. Emma found him at the kitchen table when she woke up, surrounded by yellow legal pad pages covered in his careful handwriting. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him, with the patient concern of someone accustomed to her father's overthinking tendencies. "Some," Leo lied. "I've been trying to think through all the implications. What do your lists say?" Leo smiled, despite his exhaustion. Emma had inherited his analytical approach to major decisions, though her conclusions often proved more intuitive than his methodical reasoning. "The practical arguments all favor accepting the offer," Leo said. "Better salary, excellent medical, and coverage, work that actually uses my education and interests. And the emotional arguments? More complicated. This would change everything about our lives. New country, new culture, new responsibilities. And there's the question of whether I'm making this decision based on sound judgment or because I'm attracted to Élodie." Emma reached across the table and took the pen from his hand. At the bottom of his legal pad, she wrote in her careful 12-year-old script, "What would Mom say?" The question hit Leo unexpectedly. Sarah had been gone for 4 years, but her practical wisdom still influenced his major decisions. She'd been the one who'd encouraged his language studies, who'd believed in his potential, even when academic dreams seemed financially impossible. Mom would say that safe choices aren't always the right choices, Leo said slowly. She'd probably ask me whether I'm more afraid of failing at something important or succeeding at something that doesn't matter. And what's your answer? Leo looked at his daughter, this remarkable young woman who'd inherited her mother's insight and developed her own strength through years of medical challenges. Emma had never known financial security or predictable health, yet she'd maintained optimism and curiosity about the world beyond their small Montana life. "I think I'm more afraid of staying safe," Leo admitted. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Henderson stood outside with a casserole dish and the determined expression of someone on a mission. "I saw that helicopter yesterday," she announced without preamble. "And Jake Morrison called this morning asking if you'd made any major life decisions lately, so I figured you two might need to talk through whatever's happening." Over breakfast, Leo found himself explaining the situation to Mrs. Henderson, whose practical perspective had guided him through numerous parenting challenges over the past 3 years. She listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions about logistics and timeline. "This Élodie woman," Mrs. Henderson said finally, "you trust her?" "I think so," Leo replied. "Emma seems to, and she's usually a good judge of character. The job itself sounds legitimate, more than legitimate. It's exactly the kind of work I used to dream about doing." Mrs. Henderson nodded thoughtfully. "Then the real question isn't whether you should take the opportunity. The real question is whether you're brave enough to let yourself be happy." "What do you mean?" "Leo, I've watched you for 3 years put everyone else's needs before your own. Emma's medical care, your students' learning, your employer's requirements. When's the last time you made a decision based on what would make you genuinely happy?" Leo couldn't remember. His choices had been driven by necessity, responsibility, and survival for so long that happiness had become a luxury he'd stopped considering. "But what if I'm wrong?" Leo asked. "What if this doesn't work out? What if I'm making a huge mistake that affects Emma's life?" "Honey," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "what if you're right? What if this is exactly the opportunity you've been preparing for your entire life?" That afternoon, Leo drove to the airport for what might be his final shift. Jake was waiting in his office with coffee and the kind of serious expression that preceded difficult conversations. "So," Jake said without preamble, "I heard there was some helicopter-related excitement in your neighborhood yesterday." "You heard about that?" "Leo, this is a small town. A golden helicopter landing in the residential district is the kind of news that travels fast." Jake leaned back in his chair. "I also heard it might be connected to that job opportunity I mentioned." Leo nodded, unsure how to explain the connection between his mysterious job application and Élodie's dramatic appearance. "Can I give you some advice?" Jake asked. "From someone who's spent 40 years working jobs that paid the bills but never challenged his brain?" "I'd appreciate that." "Take the chance," Jake said simply. "I've watched you work here for 3 years, and you're the most overqualified maintenance worker I've ever supervised. You speak languages most people can't pronounce, you understand cultures I've never heard of, and you help people solve problems that have nothing to do with your job description. But Emma's settled here. She has friends, doctors, routines. Emma's 12 years old and smart as hell. Kids adapt better than adults, especially when they're moving towards something better rather than running away from something bad." Jake pulled out a folder. "Besides, I did some research on this Blanchet hospitality group. They're legitimate, successful, and known for treating employees well. If someone from that organization is offering you a position, you'd be crazy not to consider it seriously." Leo spent his shift moving through familiar routines, while mentally preparing for potentially saying goodbye to the airport that had been his professional home for 3 years. The work felt different now, not menial or temporary, but foundational. These years of service had taught him about hospitality, cultural sensitivity, and the practical skills needed to help people navigate unfamiliar environments. His final tutoring session of the day was with the Anderson twins, who immediately noticed his distracted energy. "Mr. Carter," Sarah said during a break, "you seem different today, kind of excited but nervous." Leo decided on honesty. "I've been offered a job opportunity that would use my French skills in a more significant way. But it would mean moving to Europe." Michael's eyes widened. "Like, permanently. Possibly. It's complicated." "But that's amazing," Sarah exclaimed. "You're always talking about how languages are bridges, and now you'd get to build actual bridges. Between countries. It would mean leaving everything familiar," Leo pointed out. "Mr. Carter," Michael said seriously, "you've taught us that the best way to really understand a language is to use it in real situations with native speakers. Maybe this is your chance to do that." After the twins left, Leo sat in the library, where he'd taught dozens of students over the past 3 years. Each lesson had been a small bridge, a moment of connection that helped young people expand their understanding of the world. The opportunity Élodie was offering would allow him to build those bridges on a scale he'd never imagined possible. That evening, Leo and Emma had dinner with Mrs. Henderson, who'd volunteered to help them think through the practical implications of accepting Élodie's offer. "Where would you live in Paris?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "I don't know," Leo admitted. "We didn't discuss those details." "What about Emma's schooling?" "The contract mentions educational support for dependents, but I'd need to research specific options." Emma, who'd been quietly listening to the adult conversation, suddenly spoke up. "I wrote something," she said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "Can I read it?" Leo nodded, curious about what his daughter had been processing privately. Emma unfolded the paper and read in her clear, serious voice, "Dear future me, Dad got offered a really good job today that would let us move to Paris and help him use his languages for important work. I know this is scary because we've never lived anywhere else, but I think maybe being scared means it's important. Dad always tells his students that languages are bridges, and I think this job would let him build the biggest bridge ever. Also, the lady who offered the job seems really nice, and she makes Dad smile in a way he hasn't smiled since Mom died. I think we should take the chance because even if it's hard, it might be amazing, and Dad deserves amazing things. Love, Emma, age 12. Leo stared at his daughter, overwhelmed by her maturity and wisdom. "Em, are you sure about this? I'm sure that you've taken care of me my whole life, and now someone wants to take care of you. I'm sure that you light up when you talk about languages and cultures and helping people understand each other, and I'm sure that we're brave enough to try something new together." Mrs. Henderson wiped her eyes with her napkin. "Well," she said, "I think that settles it." As they prepared for bed that night, Leo realized that his decision had crystallized through the day's conversations. Emma's letter had removed his final hesitation. This wasn't just about accepting a job. It was about accepting the possibility of a life that honored his abilities and dreams while providing security for his daughter. "Dad," Emma said from her bedroom doorway, "tomorrow when the helicopter lady comes back, are you going to say yes?" Leo looked at his remarkable daughter. This young woman who'd inherited her mother's courage and developed her own strength through years of uncertainty. "Yes," he said. "I think I am." Emma smiled. "Good. I already started learning some French phrases online. I want to be ready." That night, for the first time in weeks, Leo slept soundly. Tomorrow would bring the conversation that would reshape their future, but tonight he felt the profound peace that comes from making a decision that aligns with both practical needs and authentic hopes. Élodie returned at precisely 10 o'clock Saturday morning, arriving not in the golden helicopter, but in the same modest rental SUV she'd driven during her reconnaissance week. She carried 2 cups of coffee from Murphy's Cafe and wore an expression that mixed hope with careful preparation for disappointment. Leo was waiting at the door before she knocked, Emma beside him with a small overnight bag packed just in case, as she'd explained with 12-year-old pragmatism. "Bonjour," Élodie said softly, searching Leo's face for signs of his decision. "Bonjour," Leo replied, then switched to English for Emma's benefit. "We'd like to accept your offer." The transformation in Élodie's expression was immediate and radiant. "Vraiment? Truly? Truly?" Emma confirmed with a grin. "But we have questions about practical stuff." Over the next hour, sitting around Leo's small kitchen table, they worked through logistics with the efficiency of people committed to making an ambitious plan succeed. Élodie had anticipated most of their concerns and arrived with comprehensive solutions. Housing would be provided initially, she explained, spreading photographs across the table. "I have a guest residence in the 7th arrondissement. It's spacious, fully furnished, and walking distance to excellent schools for Emma." The photographs showed an elegant Parisian apartment with tall windows, classic moldings, and rooms filled with warm morning light. Emma studied them with the intense focus she brought to important decisions. Would I go to a French school? Emma asked. There's an excellent international school nearby, Élodie replied. Many students speak English as their primary language, but you'd also have the opportunity to become fluent in French if you're interested. I'm very interested, Emma said firmly. Dad's been teaching me basic phrases and I want to be able to help with his work. Leo felt a surge of pride at his daughter's adventurous spirit. What about the transition period? You mentioned I could start with remote work. We could begin immediately, Élodie said. I've already identified 3 European companies that need cultural consultation for American market expansion. You could handle initial consultations from here while we arrange visas and Emma finishes her current semester. The medical care? Leo asked, the question that had kept him awake most of the previous night. Élodie's expression grew serious. I've already spoken with Dr. Martineau at the Children's Hospital in Paris. He specializes in Emma's condition and is willing to review her medical history immediately. The European treatment protocols are more advanced than what's currently available in Montana. Emma looked up from the apartment photographs. Would we be able to visit Mrs. Henderson and Jake and my friends here? Absolutely, Élodie assured her. The position includes travel allowances for family visits, and Mrs. Henderson would always be welcome in Paris. Leo realized that Élodie had spent the past 24 hours not just waiting for his decision, but preparing to support whatever choice he made. The level of detailed planning demonstrated both her business competence and her genuine investment in their success. There's something else, Élodie said, her tone becoming more personal. I want you both to understand that this arrangement comes with no romantic obligations. Leo, your job security doesn't depend on any personal relationship between us developing, but you're hoping it might? Emma asked, with the directness that had become her trademark. Élodie's cheeks flushed slightly. I'm hoping we'll have the opportunity to discover what might be possible between us, but I'm also committed to ensuring that your father has professional independence regardless of personal outcomes. Leo appreciated this clarification more than he could express. The job offer was legitimate and substantial enough to provide security even if romantic complications arose. When would we leave? Leo asked. The helicopter is fueled and ready, Élodie replied, but only if you're comfortable with that timeline. We could also arrange commercial flights if you prefer more transition time. Emma's eyes widened. We could leave today, in the helicopter, if your father is ready. Leo looked around their small apartment, at Emma's artwork on the refrigerator, at his father's books, at the modest life they'd built together through years of careful navigation. Then he looked at his daughter's excited expression and at Élodie's hopeful smile. I need to make some phone calls, Leo said finally. Jake deserves proper notice. Mrs. Henderson needs to know we're leaving, and I should contact my tutoring. Students, of course, Élodie said. Take whatever time you need. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of conversations and hasty preparations. Jake received the news with genuine excitement and insisted on handling Leo's resignation paperwork. Personally, Mrs. Henderson arrived with tears in her eyes and a suitcase full of Emma's favorite foods for the journey. The Anderson twins appeared with a handmade card signed by all of Leo's current students, wishing him luck in his new adventure. Mr. Carter, Sarah Anderson said as they prepared to leave, promise you'll send us postcards from all the cool places you visit. I promise, Leo replied, touched by the enthusiasm of his students. As they loaded their minimal luggage into the helicopter, Leo felt the surreal quality of stepping into a completely different life. Emma climbed aboard with the fearless excitement of someone embracing adventure, while Leo experienced the vertigo that comes from fundamental change. Nervous? Élodie asked, as the rotors began to spin. Terrified, Leo admitted, but also more excited than I've been in years. As the helicopter lifted off from the small patch of grass that had become their launching pad into an impossible future, Leo looked down at the Montana landscape that had been home for 35 years. The mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and austere, and suddenly, remarkably, not the boundary of his world, but simply one part of a much larger map. "Dad," Emma said through the headphones, "look at how small everything looks from up here." Leo squeezed his daughter's hand and realized she was right, not just about the physical perspective, but about the way their problems and limitations seemed to shrink when viewed from the vantage point of genuine possibility. Ahead lay Paris, new challenges, and the opportunity to build bridges on a scale he'd never imagined. Behind lay everything familiar and safe, but also everything that had kept his potential carefully contained. Between them sat Élodie, this remarkable woman who'd somehow seen past his circumstances to recognize abilities he'd almost forgotten. He possessed. The golden helicopter carried them toward their future with the steady confidence of something that had always been meant to happen. The first glimpse of Paris from the helicopter window left both Leo and Emma speechless. The city spread below them like an elegant tapestry, with the Seine winding through districts that Leo had studied in books but never imagined he would see. From this impossible vantage point, the Eiffel Tower rose ahead of them, no longer a photograph or tourist poster, but a real structure casting afternoon shadows across neighborhoods where he would soon be living and working. "C'est magnifique," Emma whispered, practicing the French phrase she'd learned the night before. "Yes," Élodie replied with obvious pleasure, "it is magnificent, and now it's your home too." The helicopter landed on a private helipad atop a modern building in the 7th arrondissement. As they descended via private elevator, Élodie explained the building's amenities, a concierge service, private gardens, and proximity to both her main office and Emma's new school. "The guest residence occupies the entire 3rd floor," Élodie said as they reached their destination. "It's been prepared for immediate occupancy, but please feel free to modify anything to suit your preferences." The apartment exceeded even the photograph's promise. Tall French windows filled the rooms with golden afternoon light, revealing spaces that managed to feel both elegant and welcoming. Emma immediately gravitated toward the large bedroom that would be hers, with built-in bookshelves and a window seat overlooking a courtyard garden. "Dad," she called from her new room, "there's a desk here that's perfect for homework, and I can see the Eiffel Tower from my window." Leo stood in the main living area, trying to process the transformation their lives had undergone in less than 24 hours. This morning, he'd been a janitor in Montana, struggling to afford his daughter's medical care. Now he was standing in a Parisian apartment as the cultural liaison for a European business consulting firm. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" Élodie said softly, joining him at the window that overlooked the tree-lined street below. "I keep expecting to wake up," Leo admitted. "This feels too extraordinary to be real." "Real can be extraordinary," Élodie replied. "I'm still learning that myself." Over the next several days, Leo began his new role with a mixture of excitement and professional anxiety. His first assignment involved consulting for a German automotive company seeking to establish manufacturing partnerships in the American Midwest. The work required not just translation of documents and conversations, but cultural interpretation, helping German executives understand the relationship-building expectations of American business culture. Leo found himself drawing on years of observation from his airport work, his understanding of small-town American values, and his experience helping international travelers navigate unfamiliar social environments. The skills he'd developed almost unconsciously proved invaluable in facilitating genuine communication between business partners who shared common goals but vastly different cultural approaches. Your insights about the importance of personal relationships in American business culture were exactly what our clients needed to hear, Élodie told him after his first successful consultation. You helped them understand that efficiency and relationship building aren't mutually exclusive in American contexts. Meanwhile, Emma's transition to her new school proceeded with the adaptability that Leo had hoped for but hadn't dared expect. Her international classmates came from diplomatic families, business executives, and academic professionals, creating an environment where cultural diversity was celebrated rather than merely tolerated. I made friends with a girl from Japan and a boy from Brazil, Emma reported after her first week. They're teaching me words in their languages, and I'm teaching them American expressions that Dad says are too casual for business meetings. Dr. Martineau's evaluation of Emma's medical situation brought the best news they'd received in months. The European treatment protocols offered significant advantages over what had been available in Montana, with less invasive procedures and better long-term outcomes. The treatment is not only more effective, Dr. Martineau explained during their consultation, but it's also covered completely by the French healthcare system and your employer's international insurance. There will be no out-of-pocket expenses. That evening, Leo and Élodie walked along the Seine while Emma attended a study group with her new classmates. The conversation moved naturally between French and English, covering everything from business, strategy to cultural observations, to the gradual development of their personal relationship. "I have a confession," Élodie said, as they paused on the Pont Alexandre III, watching boat traffic navigate the darkening river. "The job I created for you, it's become more valuable than I originally anticipated. The consulting requests have tripled since word spread about your cultural liaison services." Meaning your position is so successful that I need to hire additional cultural consultants. You've essentially created a new division of our business. Leo laughed, a sound that contained more genuine happiness than he'd expressed in years. "So you're saying I'm not just your charity case anymore?" "You were never my charity case," Élodie replied seriously. "You were always my recognition of unexploited talent. Now you're my business partner." The words business partner resonated, with implications that extended beyond professional collaboration. Over the past weeks, their working relationship had developed into something that honored both their individual abilities and their growing personal connection. "Élodie," Leo said, taking her hand as they watched the lights begin to illuminate the city around them. "I want you to know that whatever develops between us personally, this opportunity has already changed our lives in ways I can never adequately thank you for." "The opportunity was always mutual," she replied. "You've helped me remember why I fell in love with international business in the first place. Working with you feels like building those bridges you talked about, not just between companies, but between different ways of understanding the world." When they returned to the apartment, they found Emma on her window seat with a French workbook, practicing vocabulary with the focused determination she brought to important tasks. "Comment ça va?" Élodie asked with a smile. "Ça va très bien. Merci," Emma replied carefully, then switched to English. "That means, I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm learning all the phrases Dad uses when he's helping business people understand each other." Leo realized that his daughter was already absorbing the cultural skills that would serve her well in their international environment. Emma was becoming bilingual, not just in language, but in the kind of cross-cultural understanding that had become Leo's professional specialty. "Dad," Emma said, looking up from her workbook, "I think we made the right choice." "I think so too," Leo agreed, settling onto the comfortable couch that had become his favorite spot for reviewing business documents and planning cultural consultations. Outside their windows, Paris glittered with the promise of opportunities. They were only beginning to understand. Inside their elegant apartment, a new family was taking shape. Not just Leo and Emma adapting to extraordinary circumstances, but Leo, Emma, and Élodie learning to build something together that honored all of their individual strengths while creating possibilities none of them could have imagined alone. 6 months later, the golden helicopter touched down on the familiar patch of grass in front of Leo's old Montana apartment building. But this time, it carried a wedding party rather than a desperate rescue mission. Emma emerged first, radiant, in a pale blue dress and fluent French that impressed even Mrs. Henderson, followed by Leo in a tailored suit that reflected his transformation from small-town janitor to international business consultant. Élodie stepped out last, wearing an elegant cream-colored dress that managed to be both sophisticated and perfectly appropriate for a small Montana wedding ceremony. She carried a bouquet of French lavender mixed with Montana wildflowers, a symbol of the cultural bridge. Their relationship had become "Bienvenue à Montana," Mrs. Henderson called out in carefully practiced French, her pronunciation making Emma giggle with delighted recognition. "Merci beaucoup, Mrs. Henderson," Élodie replied warmly, embracing the woman who had become like a grandmother to Emma and whose letters had provided crucial emotional support during their transition to European life. The wedding ceremony took place in the same community center where Leo had once tutored high school students in irregular French verbs. Jake Morrison, wearing his best suit and the expression of paternal pride, served as Leo's best man. Emma stood as Élodie's maid of honor, her bilingual vows bringing tears to everyone present as she promised to help her new stepmother understand American customs while learning French traditions in return. Sarah and Michael Anderson, now college freshmen majoring in international studies, read passages in both French and English. Dr. Martinez attended with his wife, marveling at Emma's obvious health and vitality under the European treatment protocols. The local newspaper photographer captured images of a fairy tale wedding that had started with a chance encounter at the airport cafe. "Mes amis," Leo began his vows in French before switching to English for his Montana community. "6 months ago, I thought I understood what was possible in life. I believed that some bridges could only be admired from a distance, that some opportunities were meant for other people." He looked at Élodie, radiant in the afternoon mountain light that streamed through the community center windows. "Élodie taught me that the most important bridges are built between hearts, not just between cultures. She showed me that love can create opportunities that seem impossible until they become inevitable." Élodie's vows, delivered in both languages with Emma's help for the more complex English phrases, focused on how Leo had taught her that true elegance comes from authentic connection rather than sophisticated surroundings. "À Montana, dans un petit café d'aéroport, Léo m'a rappelé qui je voulais vraiment être," she said, then repeated in English. "In Montana, in a small airport cafe, Leo reminded me who I really wanted to be." The reception featured Mrs. Henderson's famous casseroles alongside catered French cuisine that Élodie had arranged. Toasts were given in multiple languages, with Jake Morrison delivering the most memorable speech about how Leo had finally found work worthy of his abilities and a woman worthy of his devotion. Emma, glowing with health and confidence, charmed the mixed crowd of Montana neighbors and Parisian business associates who had flown in for the celebration. Her easy movement between languages and cultures embodied the international life that had become their family's new normal. "Emma," said Dr. Martinez during the reception, "your latest test results are remarkable. The European treatment protocols have exceeded our most optimistic projections." "Merci, docteur," Emma replied with a grin. "That means I'll be healthy enough to help Dad and Élodie with their new business expansion into American markets." The business Leo and Élodie had built together had indeed grown beyond their initial projections. Their cultural consulting firm now employed 12 specialists in cross-cultural communication, with offices in Paris, London, and plans for an American headquarters. Leo's natural understanding of both academic principles and practical application had made him a sought-after speaker at international business conferences. "We're planning to open our American office right here in Montana," Élodie announced during her reception speech. "This community gave me my husband and showed me the importance of authentic relationships in business. It seems appropriate to bring our work home." As the evening wound down, Leo found himself standing outside the community center with Emma and Élodie, looking up at the vast Montana sky that had once seemed to represent the boundaries of his world. Now those same stars connected him to a life that spanned continents and cultures. "Dad," Emma said, Do you remember when you used to say that languages are bridges? I remember. I think people are bridges too. You and Élodie helped me connect to a bigger world, and now I get to help other people make those connections. Leo smiled at his daughter's wisdom. At 13, Emma was already planning to study international diplomacy, inspired by watching her father facilitate understanding between cultures and her stepmother build business relationships across national boundaries. The golden helicopter that would carry them back to Paris sat gleaming in the community center parking lot. No longer a symbol of impossible rescue, but of the regular travel that had become part of their international lifestyle. Mrs. Henderson would join them for Christmas in Paris, and they would return to Montana every summer to maintain connections with the community that had supported them through difficult years. As they prepared for departure the next morning, Leo walked through his old apartment one final time. The space seemed smaller than he remembered, but not confining, simply a place where one chapter of life had ended and another had begun. Emma found him in the kitchen, standing at the window where he'd once stared at the sky and wondered about possibilities beyond the mountains. Any regrets? She asked. Leo considered the question seriously. He thought about the years of financial struggle, the dreams deferred, the careful navigation around limitations that had once seemed permanent. Then he thought about the morning when a lost French woman had walked into their lives and reminded him that bridges are built to be crossed. None, he said finally. Every choice we made brought us to exactly where we needed to be. Outside, Élodie was helping Mrs. Henderson into the helicopter for her first international flight. The older woman's excitement about visiting Paris had been one of the wedding's most delightful surprises. Proof that courage and curiosity aren't limited by age or circumstance. "Ready?" Élodie called, her voice carrying the warmth that had first attracted Leo during their airport cafe conversation. "Ready!" Leo replied, taking Emma's hand as they walked toward the helicopter that would carry them home to their new life. As they lifted off from Montana soil, Leo reflected on the truth he'd learned over the past 6 months. Sometimes the right words really can change everything, especially when they're spoken with genuine understanding and heard with an open heart. And sometimes, just sometimes, those words are delivered by someone with a golden helicopter and the vision to see possibilities others might miss. The mountains fell away beneath them, beautiful and enduring, and no longer the edges of his world, but simply one wonderful part of a much larger story that was still being written.